Welcome to another insightful episode of the Banking on Community podcast. Our guest today is James Jimmy Evans, a seasoned attorney and board-certified family law specialist based out of Austin, Texas. Since 1995, Jimmy has been practicing law, and since 2010, he's been board-certified in family law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. At his law firm, Evans Family Law Group, he handles a wider range of family law cases, always striving to ensure minimum stress and disruptions for his clients while achieving legal outcomes that make families stronger. Welcome, Jimmy Evans, to the Community Podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes, sir.
And I always look forward to this. This is one of the highlights of my day.
Right.
Is getting to talk to successful entrepreneurs of all kinds, and I can't wait for our listeners to hear more about what you do.
Well, let's do it.
Let's get it on. So, Jimmy, tell us a little bit about your journey in the field of law and what led you to specialize in family law. Let's just jump right into it.
Yeah, that's a very broad question.
Right.
But what led me to the field of law really was my dad was an attorney, and I grew up around that. And a long time ago, I had some important, influential people in my life, surrogate kind of family members, who put their arms around me and just told me to go to law school. And for lots of different reasons, that primarily you don't have to be a lawyer if you go to law school, but that their theory was, which turned out to be right, that you just have a lot more opportunities in life if you have that law degree. But that led me to the path where I went to Texas Wesleyan University School of Law at the time, which is now Texas A&M School of Law.
Okay.
And I grew up in the Fort Worth area, so that led me to an internship at the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office. And I was very fortunate to basically just get a job there, not knowing exactly where that was going to go. But law enforcement was good to me for sure. Being a prosecutor, I had a lot of fun with that.
So you started as a prosecutor?
Started out as a prosecutor in law enforcement.
In Fort Worth?
In Fort Worth. And we don't have time to cover all the crazy creative things that I experienced when I was there.
I can't even imagine.
But I left there not quite 5 years in, about 4.5 years. And this leads me to the family law, how I got there, because I left there with about probably 90 jury trials to my experience and a multitude of hearings in front of, I mean, we lived in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And the long story short is I left there to go work for a civil law firm in Arlington, Texas. And then fast forward there, I ended up coming to Austin to work with my dad. My dad was in the political consulting field. He was a lobbyist.
Okay.
This is going to sound like it's taking a left turn, but this is the story. I went to go study Spanish because I thought I was going to make a path in the politics.
Okay.
And I thought, being...
You needed to be like bilingual.
I thought being in Texas, being bilingual would help, and so... But what ended up happening is I went to Ecuador for a couple of summers to study Spanish. What ended up happening is I came back.
No Rosetta Stone for you.
No.
Full immersion
I went
study.
fully immersed into Quito, Ecuador. And,
there you go.
Ended up 5 summers there. But for this story, the first 2 summers is what mattered. And I came back, and that ended up, I founded a law firm that spoke Spanish and catered specifically to the Spanish-speaking community here in Austin. And we were known as the Los Abogados Güeros. And at that time, my day was... 85% in Spanish. I found a partner who was very similarly situated in life and an attorney and all that. And we started, and the whole idea was to bring a level of professionalism that community was not receiving. And in my opinion, because I was using it initially to just study the language, right? And representing people for basically nothing, because I was just trying to learn the language, thinking I was going to run for governor someday. And I just kept noticing how people were just getting taken advantage of by their own community and by these attorneys. And so I just decided to make that a mission of mine. And Jeff Peak, he still has his firm today. And we founded that firm. And for about 11 years, I operated it as the Los Abogados Güeros. And we primarily did criminal defense work because that was the world that I had come from. So,
I was going to say, it's back when you were in Tarrant County as prosecuting attorney. You saw a lot of criminal.
Yeah, so I was basically, at that time, I was an expert in criminal law, both prosecution and criminal defense. And and Jeff was primarily into criminal defense, and so that was our specialty.
Got it.
Jeff eventually took it in a direction where he's now board certified in immigration law, and we were probably one of the first firms in that community to specialize in the combination of criminal defense where it was intersecting with immigration, the world of immigration. And
which is a complete and utter mess.
Yes, and it was brand new at the time, and ICE. And this is a whole different direction for this interview, but it's probably more interesting to be honest. But that's when ICE. You would read about ICE coming to the jail and people running into problems with ICE, and we became specialists in that world. And Jeff eventually became board certified in immigration law. And then the answer to your question is family law just kind of started coming into the door with our firm. And
family law because everybody's got a family.
Yeah. I mean, just divorce or primarily in that world, it was custody stuff.
Custody.
Yeah. And there was divorce. And I just raised my hand and said, I'll do it. I mean, because I came to family law at that time with basically zero family law experience, but I had so much courtroom experience that I was very comfortable in the courtroom. And so I figured I could try my way into becoming an experienced.
No pun intended.
Right. I could go to court and figure out, and become an expert in family law. And that was my theory. And ultimately, that's what happened. And as I took on family law matters in the office, it ended up just suiting me. It was a very natural fit, that area of law. And I just took to it very naturally and whatnot.
So there's a broad range. You've covered a lot of ground. There's a broad range in family law.
Yeah.
Right. And it sounds like you've had some influences that have kind of shaped, like, how do you determine what you're going to do in your family law and what you're not going to do?
Well, to be honest with you, back then it was trial and error because I was learning along with the clients, but eventually I started becoming an expert in that world. And in 2010, Jeff and I split up that partnership, and that was the time that I decided I wanted to become board certified in family law. Because I was having these hearings and trial work against these other attorneys in the family law world in Travis County who were board certified or were super lawyers and in the Texas Monthly Magazine. And I kept saying, I want to be one of those guys, right? Like, what does that mean to be board certified? It must mean something. And so in 2010, I took that test and studied like crazy for it and learned a whole lot of things that I didn't realize was in family law. And it's what exposed me to an even broader range of areas like you're asking about, because,
so you're for any one family law. You're not in a particular socioeconomic segment or
no.
You're across the board family law.
Yeah, at this point in terms of the practice areas, we do divorce, complex property divorce work, and complex custody work. I would say I'm an expert in those areas as well as probably the mental health area where that intersects with, mental health.
Which is a real challenge.
It's a real thing for sure.
It's a real problem.
And I have to say, when I first came to family law, I didn't really believe in that stuff.
Yeah.
But the more I experienced it, both from the kids
real and
it
the exists, right?
It's a real thing.
Yeah.
And you really have to learn how to approach and navigate and manage those different kinds of personality profiles, as I call them. But once you learn those, then, you can definitely help clients when they're running up against that, because it's a very difficult thing.
Does family law touch on, like, let's say there's a mom and a dad and they've got everything set up and then mom and dad no longer are around and then the kids are running around and there's all kinds of fights that happen and all kinds of... Do you get involved in those to kind of help navigate the waters after mom and dad are gone?
You mean like deceased?
Yeah.
No, that would be more of an estate.
So that's more
probate.
On the estate probate side.
Or trust side of things.
Yeah.
Or guardianship kind of stuff. I
Okay.
mean, we're involved when the parent. Now, we might get involved in that scenario where an aunt or an uncle or a step parent maybe wants to step in and take custody or conservatorship of the kids.
Okay, got it.
Like if the parents both one
We're in an
parent
accident
died
or something.
and then the next parent was married but died a month later or something, and maybe the step parent wants to step in because there's no more parents around, but maybe the other parent was just out of their lives or had a substance abuse problem or something. So we might get involved that way. But the other areas are I do lots of prenuptial agreements, pre-marriage agreements, post-marriage agreements, especially since COVID. I'll probably do 25 to 30 of those a year. And I'm just one attorney. So that's why I say, to me, that's quite a few. Yeah. And then we do adoptions. We deal with emergency actions or orders, protective orders where there's family violence issues involved, post-divorce or post-custody orders where we're modifying those orders or we need to enforce them where people aren't complying.
Fairly heartbreaking in some of the stuff you're seeing.
It's not always fun.
Yeah.
In terms of like just fun, like you're playing golf or something. I drive a lot of satisfaction out of it. I wouldn't say it's fun, but I personally and professionally derive a lot of satisfaction because I feel like at this point I'm an expert, kind of like a doctor who has seen so many different scenarios. They can actually say, you know what, this is what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
And this is how we're going to treat it. And like that, sometimes that's the first time that people who come to me in a crisis point have heard that. And it brings them an utter sense of calm, even though they're not calm. It brings them a different kind of calm.
It gives them a moment to think.
Well, to
feel confident that they got
plan.
somebody on their side.
There's a plan, and somebody knows what they're doing, and that you can trust this process. And it's not going to just be utter chaos on the other side of it.
I imagine that there's a lot of competition in your space.
Oh yeah,
and a lot of people that say they're in the family law business, but what are some of the experiences or outcomes that are unique to you that help differentiate you and set you apart in the marketplace?
Oh man, there's been
Tough
so
question.
many different kinds of situations, but all of us go through creative circumstances where you have to, and honestly, that's probably where I distinguish myself. Most of your listeners, even if they're family law professionals in my field, if they're listening to this, probably don't realize that I think at this point I've got 113 or 14 jury trials to my name. 14 of those are in family law, which is really unheard of for somebody who's been in family law like at all, but at my age even. And so that's really where I can distinguish myself because I've been to court so many times and I've heard the comments from the judges. I've won, I've lost, I typically do well at this point, but it enables me to be very creative with people and very creative with their situation because I can see it from start to finish. And I could put them in a situation where I know what the courts are likely to say or do and what's reasonable to ask and what's not, and I can really help bring a sense of peace and calm about that part of the process. Because that's what I find the most is the lack of communication really causes people angst and the lack of a real strategical plan.
Yeah.
Is another real issue, I think, between family law professionals and clients. And so I really pride myself on being creative. I know my creativity works because I've tried it. And I can also tell you when I'm being creative, but it's probably not going to work, but we're going to be creative because we're trying to really get to this objective. And so that's probably where I distinguish myself. And having been to court and done cross-examination and presenting evidence so many times, I also pride myself on getting people prepared for that process and explaining how that works and getting them ready to testify, understanding what the theme is and understanding how to, to testify and approach that. That makes a big difference.
Well, I understand, Evans Family Law Group isn't just a name. I mean, it's a family-owned business. And tell me a little bit about what it's like to run a family-owned business doing what you're doing and how that influences the way that you're working with your clients.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is my wife was working with me for a long time. She retired as an elementary school principal. And as we were growing in the Los Abogados Güeros, that Spanish-speaking era, she came on to help us organize and do a lot of office administrative and structuring and management and things to help us build that. And then when I got board certified and started Evans Family Law in 2011, I think it was, she came over and helped me build all that. And she and I worked together really, really, really well. We were just one of those exceptions where working with your spouse was good. We've now built a team where, I don't think she's needed as much. And so she's enjoying time with our kids and trying to help them get ready for college and ready themselves for sports.
That's a tough process these days.
And so, and that's a full-time job in and of itself. Yeah. But she was definitely a very valuable and critical role in helping us build that. And it was really, it's a lot of fun to be able to share that experience with your spouse.
And your clients. You're not some big corporate law firm.
Yeah, we're not a big corporate law firm.
You see it every day.
Clients would meet her and say hello, and it definitely, and like one of my staff has been with me almost 18 years. I joke around saying she's my day wife, and so people get to meet them and see and feel that experience, and they know we're unique that way.
Yeah. So one of the things that's really important to us and why we did this podcast is just the topic of community. And tell us a little bit about your community focus and your community strategy that you have at your company and how you get involved in the community and the things that you're involved with and how that kind of shapes, your business and the things that you get involved with?
Yeah, primarily that's been not so much from a business standpoint, but the business has allowed me as a father and a spouse to be involved with my kids and their community.
Yeah.
Because their sports has been dominated our lives. And so we were involved with Lake Travis youth sports for a long time, sat on the board there and ran the concession stands for a couple of years. I was the guy flipping burgers and making dogs. And my son's at St. Michael's Academy now, rising senior there, and we'll work the concessions there. And I do the grilling and things like that. And the business has allowed us to donate to those causes and to the schools and contribute to those things. We definitely encourage our staff to be involved in things that they believe in, and support them in that. But that's primarily...
It's amazing how many businesses don't do that.
Yeah.
That's good that you do.
You're probably right about that.
It is important, right? Yeah. To give them the time to do it and the freedom to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it brings a sense of satisfaction that you're giving to something else.
That's not just right there below hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Well, so tell me a little bit about what advice you'd give to aspiring lawyers at this point in time. I mean, you've got a really interesting and unique background, so I would imagine that you've got a really good ability to give somebody some good advice.
Well, it's especially if it's family law, because there's so many different areas of law, like banking law. I'm not even sure I would know what to give advice, but if it's family law, I have said before and many times, get as many trials and hearings in front of courts and stop worrying about feeling stupid. Stop worrying about making mistakes, because sometimes that's the only way to truly learn. Otherwise, if you're just reading about the topic and you're trying to advise people, but you really don't know how it plays out, it's probably like, this may be a dumb analogy, but I just thought of this in the moment. It's probably like fighting fires as a fireman, right? There's actually doing it. And when you're on scene and you're seeing how the flames are reacting, to go this way or that way, or use this tool or that tool.
That's a good analogy.
As opposed to reading about it and theoretically discussing how to fight fires. There's a big difference between those two things, because when you're trying to manage a strategy around somebody's life and they're with you in a moment of crisis, because most of the time that's how people come to us, you've really got to understand, and you've got to be able to bet well that your strategy is going to work in court.
So does family law oftentimes, as a percentage of the cases that you touch, end up being adjudicated through the courts?
No, I would say it's the opposite. And in
it
fact,
is the opposite.
Yeah, I think the more experience I got and the better reputation you get, those cases settle.
Settle before you get...
Yeah, I found that to be true, because you just develop a reputation. And the more of the other attorneys on the other side of cases that develop that same experience, most of us just call each other.
Yes.
And we all know how it's going to turn out.
Yes.
And so we know our judge, we know what's going to happen. And most of us have a really good rapport and can just talk about the facts and the reality of the case. And so we can typically settle things. But I would say most, in fact, probably 85+% don't go to court. Or except maybe there's a lesser percentage of that on a temporary basis, something that needs to be addressed on an interim basis, like a couple that owns a small business, close corporation or private business. They need to know how to manage that, or they've got rental properties and somebody's got to be able to manage those and take those, or there's kids issues or financial issues. And so those go to court more often.
Yeah.
But then typically, because of cost and anxiety and all the things that come with the pleasantries of litigating with a lawyer and going through court, people find a way to compromise and settle.
Yeah. So this aspiring lawyer that you say, if you're going to go into family law, you need to have this experience, and you need to work on it quickly, and you need to get a lot of it. Yeah. So do you feel like that the law schools are preparing these kids for that?
You can't. I mean, there's no way to prepare you for that, because
there's no practicums. You don't get to sit at the desk with the.
Well, they do that.
They do some of that?
Yeah, they do that. There's a lot of trial advocacy work, and there's lots of good schools with good reputation. Even Texas A&M now has a really good reputation for those things. But there's just no substitution for being in that courtroom when your client has a risk of losing their kid.
Yeah.
Right. They're losing the custody to their 7-year-old kid, maybe due to something they did with alcohol or just something stupid.
Yeah.
And that's high risk.
Yeah.
And you can't you cannot learn to feel that in a mock trial setting and what that's like, or all of it. Or here's a really good example. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've gone to court and we think we have 3 hours to present our evidence. And so we've planned around that meticulously, and you announce and, the judge says, okay, you've got an hour, go.
Oh my.
Now what do you do? I mean, you've got 10 witnesses in the hallway. You've prepped each one of those. You know how much time you need for each one. And, that's where just being comfortable in the courtroom and being able to just, say, okay, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and be able to triage in that moment, and nothing can prepare you for that except for experience.
So you've been doing this now for a while. You got the family law practice. What's the future look like for you as an entrepreneur? How do you view your future for your firm and your employees, and what does that look like from your vantage point?
Well, my goal right now is to hopefully be known as, for my team, as I guess they're going to come back and watch this, but to be a teaching and developing attorney. I'm really proud of the team that we've developed at this point, and I want them to be, this may be a dumb analogy, but as a parent, I want them to be better than I ever was.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to give them each different unique experiences and bring Jimmy to their experiences so that they can learn to do those things, because they don't have the chance to have the hearings and the trial work that I had. So I'm trying to bring that to them and give them a sense of comfort to try and be creative, step out of your shell, look at things this way. And so I'm really trying to give them those opportunities. I mean, it's my hope that at this point that I've got some folks that are interested in long-term coming on board, buying an interest in it, or, whatnot. And hopefully they'll keep me and allow me to retire, as part of Evans Family Law Group. And then,
well, they probably better since you started it.
Well, so far my name's still on the door.
That's right.
I don't have that mutiny yet, but then my goal is to, because I've worked a lot and spent a lot of time and hours putting this together, and it's time for me.
You still aspirations for politics and public service, or is that
that world has changed so much it doesn't interest me anymore, except to just read about it and talk about it. But my next step and phase is to give back more time to my family and my wife, who deserves me to give more time back to just being at home and travel.
You said you have at least one I know of child that was that you said was going to head off to college and maybe even play sports in college. Do you have other children?
Our daughter is 18.
Okay.
She starts OSU, Oklahoma State University, in the fall. She actually is about to complete her private pilot's license, which is pretty cool about her.
Awesome. Good for her.
She's been really killing it this summer to get ready for that. Today, about 3 hours ago, she got the appointment scheduled to do what's called her checkout ride. And she's going to get to do that at Oklahoma State University with some other students. So that's really cool.
Is a checkout ride the solo, or is that the one before the solo?
So she's done her solo work.
She's already done all that.
The checkout ride is where you go up with a completely neutral instructor who's never met you. And they observe you and at times can pepper you with questions that are completely random. And while you're flying and soloing, essentially you have to be able to respond.
Where did she come up with this? Were you a pilot? Did your family, anybody in your family?
My family, my dad was a pilot. My mom was a pilot. Her grandfather on my wife's side was a pilot. My brother-in-law was at the Air Force Academy, and he flew, and it's a long story.
There was influence there.
Yes, and I thought I was going to be a pilot, and I had actually been admitted to the Air Force Academy, but my life went in a different direction. So I think she took from that, and I have a client who is a commercial fly or pilot, and he took us up one day, and I just asked if he would take us up, because she kind of just seemed interested, and he let her at the controls, and for whatever reason that sparked something that she's truly passionate about.
So you are in that phase where you're going to be spending a lot more time invested in those communities where those kids get to go to school, and hoping that they get back home to see you every now and then.
Yeah, and she's not just starting OSU. She got admitted to the professional pilot program there. So
nice.
So it's cool.
That's exciting.
Yeah. So we're hoping to be able to take some weekend journeys I'm sure to their annoyance, and having their parents there.
They'll love having you there.
To go to some of the games and things like that. And Charlie, my son, he committed to Elon. I was telling you, Elon University.
Yeah.
So he'll be going there
to play baseball.
Play baseball. And so both kids are on a really good path.
That's awesome.
So that's nice.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
Yeah.
So you're going to take this firm and kind of keep it perpetual.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We've created a footprint and a name that I think is creative and has a deep level of experience that a lot of firms don't.
Yeah.
You can compare me to a lot of other attorneys, but they have years of experience, not necessarily the same experience. It's probably the equivalent of going out to eat, and there's one steakhouse versus the other one. They're both steaks, but like, man, that one's just really good.
Yeah.
There's just a difference.
Yeah.
And there's people at my level who charge as much or more than I do, but have less experience. And so it's probably another round of for folks to hear an interview about how to pick attorneys and how to, go through that process more than anything. But
one question I want to ask before we go, but so I'm just curious, how hard is it to find good young new attorneys?
It's been really hard to find. When you say good, that's the qualifier,
right?
Because
we're not looking for just anybody. We're looking for good ones, especially when we're small business owners.
It's been very difficult or it was. I have a really good team in place. You've met one of them here today. Avery's been out practicing for about a year, but you would think she's been out for probably 3 years. Shara Dixon McDonald, who just had a baby and in our office, and she's been out a couple of years or almost 3 years, and she defies her years of experience as well. And so that's one of the intangibles that I like to look for. Jay Riggs is another associate attorney in my office who comes to us similarly with about a year and a half experience, but it was really good experience. And again, he exceeds what he feels like on paper. And then we have she's not really an associate attorney, but technically that's who she is. But she's been out 10 years or 11 years. Her name is Kimberly House Evans, and she married into Evans, so we're not related. And she's and she works in our Bastrop office. So we have a Bastrop office out there, and she has she's got a lot of experience. Her experience is much deeper, and so it's been fun to work with her. But the question is very relevant and true. It's very difficult to find good, qualified, and the intangibles that you need
Hard work.
of an attorney. Don't even get me started on that.
Willing to go the extra mile.
Yeah, because the millennial thought process, I don't know if I'm stepping into it, but
come on,
man, going through that process and watching that kind of mentality, because I'm a guy that you get up and you work, right? I mean, I don't make money unless I'm working for people.
I'm smiling because I have a friend that's got a boutique law firm, small to medium-sized boutique law firm, and he's in multiple states. And his story to me is like, Jeff, he said, you just don't understand how hard it is. There's client work that's got to be done by Monday. Mm-hmm. And they do a lot of work for public companies. Yeah. And everything's time sensitive when you're dealing with M&A and corporate security stuff. And he says, if one of these attorneys that's supposed to be working all weekend, we find out about it on the Thursday, that attorney has no problems letting me know that they're going to their buddy's bachelor party in Colorado, and they're going to be out of town all weekend. Yeah, and they got a wedding to attend, or or their buddy's in town.
Sorry,
and they don't think twice about it. And then the work gets done by him, the founder of the firm. Right. He and one of the senior partners stays all weekend, and they work all weekend to get the client taken care of and happy. And that younger attorney it never even crosses their mind. Well,
there's a couple of different aspects of that. The work ethic and the drive, that's one of the intangibles that I like to look for. Like I'd almost wish a law degree wasn't even required. I mean, because somebody who's willing to work and get their hands dirty, not in an unethical way, but you know what I mean? And really fight for somebody, that intangible is hard to find. And the second thing that's hard to find is somebody, the young attorney type, who they don't appreciate because our firm is really busy, what it takes to get to be busy. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of work, reputation, ethics, experience, lots of hard knocks and time, which is why I'm trying to find a way to give that time back to my family, right? But
that's good.
And it's hard for them to appreciate that. And when people are complaining about how much work there is, they constantly hear me joking in the office, like, guys, I've been there when the phone stopped ringing. Uh-huh. I know what that feels like. Yeah. And so that's why you will never hear me complain about being too busy.
Yeah.
And it's hard for them to appreciate that. Like if you went out just on your own, because I literally, now that you've heard this or we've done this podcast, I literally just broke out of the Spanish community. I was probably the most experienced white lawyer in family law that no one had ever heard of. I came into the Westlake community, set up an office, crappy website, just threw it out there, and board certified at that point with all kinds of trials in that Spanish community. But then that's why nobody had heard of me, because the lawyers that I was working with were primarily in that community. So when I stepped out here in what I call the English community, or started here in the Rollingwood, Westlake, Lake Travis area, I started having success, and people were really surprised, like, who is that, kind of a thing. And so every phone call to me mattered in the process of building the success of the firm. And so I know they get sick of me telling that story, but I repeat,
keep telling it.
I keep telling them all the time.
I tell my people at that same thing in the bank, take every phone call.
Every phone call matters.
Because you never know when they're not going to come.
Yeah, and even if they're not going to be able to hire us,
totally.
It's okay. Treat them with respect as if they're going to hire somebody, because everybody's a walking billboard about their experience.
Phone call.
Yeah.
You never know.
Exactly, 100%.
Well, I sure am fascinated by what you do, and I want to thank you very much for coming on the podcast. But before we go,
yes, sir.
I ask, my last question I ask is, everybody on the podcast, what is the most important or the most valuable investment that you've ever made?
Are you talking financial?
It's your call. You get to decide.
Well, in my opinion, the most important investment I've made is in the people around me.
Yeah.
And there's some people that we've been able to hire, and the team that we have, and probably starting with marrying my wife is probably a good start, because I definitely
you'll get points for that.
Married up, but that's probably a very short answer that requires a longer explanation. But definitely investment. The people, because I've invested in a lot of time in a certain core number of people in my life, and it's made a huge difference.
It's a great and very worthwhile investment.
Yeah.
And I hear that a lot.
People matter.
They do.
Yeah.
Jimmy, thank you so much for coming on.
It's been great. Thank you.
I enjoyed it a lot. I know this isn't your first rodeo, but I want to thank you for joining the Keystone Bank Community Bank podcast.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Thanks for coming in.
All right.
Thanks for joining Banking on Community from Austin, Texas. Today's episode gave you an aha moment. Would you let us know? We'd love to hear from you. You can come into one of our branches and share with us what you loved about today's conversation, or reach out to us on social media. Community banking is about solving problems, not just for customers, but for neighbors. If you know someone in our community that would benefit from this conversation, please share this podcast with them.